This is Ejaz Haider and you're watching SDTV. While the media spectrum has expanded rapidly over the last 7-8 years, there are a number of issues that need to be looked into by the media itself and also the critics outside. No such attempt has as yet been made. Today we sit here and I've tried to gather a panel for you of some of the luminaries of the media. So welcome all of you, and I think I really want to make this into an interactive session. A number of questions, Quatrina, starting from you. Is there a problem with the structure of the media here? Are there problems of function here?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Ejaz. I think one of the biggest problems we have is that television channels, when they initially started in Pakistan, it was just like a race to be out there. And everybody wanted to be a national channel. Consequently, we don't have smaller city channels, we don't have small regional channels, or they're emerging now, but they're in different languages. But we never had smaller channels to begin with, which would be the training ground for journalists who would then make it onto the national scene. So what we were seeing was essentially kids who were coming straight out of university or college, being given 2 or 3 months of training, being handed microphones and cameras and told to go out there. Now that works beautifully for reporters. I think that's a great way to have reporters start out. But when it comes to the anchors, the television anchors who anchor primetime television shows, and in many ways shape public opinion in this country, that's where I see the inherent dangers of having people who haven't been trained in the profession. Most of us here have made it up the ranks. I started my career in 1988, as a sub-editor in a newspaper. And I worked my way up, learning as we went along about what ethics are, what rules are, everything like that.
Okay, hold that thought, Quatrina. One important point that you mentioned, and I'm going to take that to Fahd, because Fahd set up the Express TV channel, and he also ran the Dunia channel, which is now in the news for all the wrong reasons. Fahd, this whole thing about getting 20-somethings and giving them a mic, putting them in front of the camera, and asking them either to be anchors, news anchors, or go out there in the field and get the story. What is the thought behind this? And is the idea simply to tell them to go and get the story? Or is it also important to tell them how to get the story and what actually is the story and how is it to be relayed?
I think there's nothing really wrong in sending young people out to report for television. It's worked out well for the channels that I've worked for, primarily because we didn't have a choice. You don't have trained manpower. So when channels opened, they either went and poached people from the print or they hired just new people. And as experience tells us, those who came from print often could not cope with the speed of television or the requirements of television because they had their own set of ways of doing things which are different. So young people are not a bad proposition. Many of them have flourished both as reporters, as anchors, even in the newsroom. The problem is when you don't train them. So whichever group of people, youngsters, have had the opportunity, even if it's like a month-long training, have done well. But then some of them, most of them now who are joining in, don't have the luxury of being trained, because when they join a running channel, then they just have to, like coming on a treadmill, it's moving. So you can't stop and say, let me understand how this works. They're thrown out, they've got to go and bring stuff regardless of whether it is right or wrong. Why that pressure? That's a separate issue. I think we can come back later. Why those young people are forced to do things which essentially are not right, but then they don't have a choice.
Okay, so you're setting up a channel, you're getting these youngsters, you are also getting some experienced people, so there is a mix here of the young and the slightly older experienced lot. And you actually hold training workshops for them. But once you've started the channel, the new intake is simply thrown into this. You don't have a separate month-long course or a workshop for them before you throw them at the deep end.
I know of no channel which actually has a running training program. Off and on, some channel would organize something or some NGO would do it, but the training which is being imparted through, you know, a weekend long workshop are pretty much useless. So essentially, the answer to your question is no. And that is why a lot of problems are being created. And secondly, there is no institution where we can send people to get trained. Like for example, LUMS has a center for business people who come, and even for a weekend they can come and get trained. There is no institute in Pakistan. So if you want training, the only opportunity is on-the-job training, and that is not very good training.
Okay.
Or they go overseas on scholarships with different people.
Which is fine, but let's just put it in the reverse. We started with some kind of skepticism, or at least I started with some kind of skepticism about the 20-somethings. But what we have seen really, Moeed, here, that it is the experienced lot, it's the older lot in many cases, the Khalifas as we call them, frankly, who have created a certain kind of culture here which needs to be reset, which needs to be reviewed, which needs to be reconfigured.
It is true that Pakistani media suffers from various sorts of problems, and one of them can be a lack of training and capacity issue. Many young people are there who do not know the norms, the ethics, have not been properly trained. There are no good schools, especially with the point of view of electronic media or workshops, and as Fahd and Quatrina have pointed out. But I think this is not the central problem. As you mentioned, the older lot is also doing it. I think the central problem is that the Pakistani electronic media has very quickly mushroomed and expanded its size from 2002 to 2012. It's about 10 years time period. And journalists, whether they were in print or electronic before this massive expansion, were not a very well paid class of professionals, unlike the doctors, the engineers who make...
So you saying,
Yeah.
sorry, I cut into this, but just a clarification, you're actually saying that journalists are professionals. This is a point, incidentally, the reason I raised this is because H.L. Mencken actually said that journalists are not professionals.
Well, I didn't realize into the the exact legal, but I think in England they had professional societies like NUJ. I joined National Union of Journalists and all that, and there was a certain code of conduct which you have to follow, and they suspend you, they take your membership away if you violate that. But without going into the nitty-gritty of the legal argument, what I'm actually saying is the bottom line of the argument is that journalists were a kind of people who would work very hard in this country. They've always worked very hard, but it was an underpaid profession, right? It was not a field in which you could make a lot of money. With the massive rise of electronic media, the power and the influence of so many people in the electronic media, the ability to hurt people or the ability to benefit the power elite has increased significantly. And as a result, just like it happened in civil services, or it happens in judiciary, or it happens in politics, there is a certain cost to pay for it. So the journalists have become very quickly very corrupt. So corruption of the element where people are actually receiving money and they are serving the people who pay them the money is one aspect.
Is there a sense of inevitability here that because they are now powerful, so they necessarily have to be corrupt?
They were corrupt before also. It's just that the stakes have changed. The stakes have gone higher.
The percentage has changed, but the situation looks dismal. You see, I think you cannot separate the corruption of the media people and the journalists, because this is one point. I have to come to the second point as well. But you cannot separate them away from the massive corruption of the Pakistani society. When you have a system in which the political elite, the judiciary, especially in the lower courts, the bureaucracy, the civil bureaucracy, the taxation, the Federal Board of Revenue, the military elite, the land mafia, and everyone is corrupt. Everyone. This is a system that is built on graft, on nepotism, akarba parvari, which you call in Urdu, and on payments. This is how the system runs. So how could you then say that we will create an island of, this was a myth. What happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks is the myth has been finally busted. The second thing that has happened is...
Which myth? That we are
the
clean?
myth that media is somehow or the other...
that we are angels, that we can do no wrong, that we have the...
So
we can lecture the whole world.
Just because we sit there and sermonize, and we point towards others' graph.
I think the Pakistani electronic media journalists were benefiting from a psychological concept that was given by Bander, which is called neuro-linguistic programming. That someone who appears on the screen and speaks, you actually think, you actually get influenced. So you have people who are nuts who appear on the screen, and the general public thinks that they are patriot, nationalistic. They are raising, I mean, the voice against the rich and the powerful. That was all nonsense to begin with. I mean, that never existed, never in 2002, never in 2003. But the myth continued, this fantasy and this romantic notion continued. The second thing that happened, very important before Imtiaz takes it up, is that a new space was being created. As a result of the reforms of General Musharraf and the expansion, a new space got created. A new space that threatened the entrenched economic and political interest of the old classes. So very quickly the old classes realized that this is a new space to exploit, the space of the electronic media. And they moved into it, they invested money and they took control. So all journalists, on one side they were corrupt for personal reasons, on the other side they were commanded by the financial interests that controlled the television channels. Then comes the rating. So on one hand the State is compelled to produce sensational content because of sustaining his market position. On the second hand, he
but
has
then
political and
these
economic
people who you're talking to, sorry,
Yeah.
I don't think they came in because in their hearts they were thinking about the glory of journalism.
Not at all.
They
Not
came
at
in
all.
That's the
because,
scary
That's
part.
precisely my point.
and that is the scariest part. The reason why these people came in, occupied the space through financial muscle and through political muscle. And now they've occupied it. But their direction, their intentions are far from the requirements of journalism.
You're talking
and hence
about the
problem.
owners of the channels,
but here's,
right?
here's
Yeah, you're
my,
talking about the owners.
Here's my point, and this is where I'll go to Imtiaz. Imtiaz, do you really think that journalism, if we talk about it in terms of some kind of normative, moral, reach, instead of the fact that it is at one level and at a very central level grounded in commercialism? I mean, you can't really have, unless you have state broadcasters like you had in the Soviet Union or you had in China, in command economies, you can't really have what we call quote unquote independent media, even though that's a myth in itself.
Well, I think what we're discussing right now is probably a blend of various factors, a cocktail of socio-political, financial factors. And with reference to Pakistan, it's rooted in our socio-political culture. It's a kleptocracy, starting from the general headquarters in Rawalpindi to Islamabad, spread across in the four provincial capitals, where this combination of the generals, politicians, and bureaucracy consider themselves as something like sacrosanct, above law, that they can plug and play with the media as well. And in that game, I think a lot of
anchors, and we're not talking of the younger people, we're talking of experienced people. You know them, I know them. And there are numerous corruption or graft stories also to them. So they have started considering themselves as the makers or breakers, as Moeed said, of governments, or that they can hurt or benefit somebody. And what we see today is it's precisely because of this, that a few anchors, we're not talking about everybody, a few anchors have taken upon themselves the role of makers or breakers. And this is what we have seen in the latest scandal. And this was something that had been in the air. I recall about a year ago, somebody wrote an open letter to the prominent anchors that please come down to the earth. Don't play with the destiny of the people. Don't play into the hands of these kleptocrats. And on this issue, I wrote an article. 2 national newspapers have rejected that article, precisely because I tried to project this nexus that currently exists between all important components of the ruling elite of this country. And what we see in the media, just reflection of that. And secondly, I think the human resource development, nobody pays any attention to that. I remember I've been working for a media organization, foreign media organization. Local big media czars, they've been contacting us for training of their human resource. That, don't you have any programs for us to offer? I mean, they invest, let's say, $20 billion, but they don't invest maybe 2 million rupees for the training of their people. That's why the journalistic standards have also gone down. That's how they have also compromised the journalistic principle. This is what we have seen, a drastic degeneration of professionalism, journalistic professionalism in the last 10 years, both outside the country as well as inside Pakistan.
But here's my question. We actually began some ways with the training aspect, with this particular point about we need to have people who know what the story is, how to get that story, what exactly, how to project that story. But frankly, later on our discussion has actually gone towards another aspect of this,
Because there are multiple dimensions.
which is no, but here's my question. If we say that the media are operating within a certain kind of system, which is essentially a rentier system, then regardless of whether we train the youngsters or not, if the system does not allow for ethical reporting or programming for the large part, I would say, then whether you get a trained person to do the bidding of a media person,
Exactly.
or
Brilliant.
whether you get an
Brilliant.
untrained person,
Brilliant.
it does not really matter.
I'll give you an example.
This is the basic
I'll
root
give you
cause,
an
Mr.
example that will clarify that to everyone who's watching it, to anyone who watches that. If you're a surgeon, right, there could be two possibilities. You're a bad surgeon, that a bad surgeon whose skill is that of a butcher, you destroy the body or whatever. Or you could be very fine, you have very fine cutting ability and stitching ability. But unless your cause is to heal and not to do harm, which is the ethical dimension of the medical profession, you can employ the same sophisticated technique. You could be a berserk surgeon, as you see in some of the sci-fi, science fiction films. You could have all the technique. So by saying this, that we will have the capacity building of the reporters, as long as the ethical dimension, the management of the media is not according to some sort of conduct, right? Some sort of transparent conduct, and the purpose is not to serve public interest. I mean, however clever and smart and educated and skillful the reporters might be, I mean, their skills will actually be employed to further damage the society. So the capacity building is an NGO case.
Which is where we come back to, I think, the original argument which we were mentioning about why these people have come into the media. What their intention is, the people who are now calling the shots in the media, whether they are owners or whether they are people in very senior positions. And unfortunately, a majority of them have not come in because they feel that, this profession has an important role to play in the larger public good, in the development of society, in openness and transparency and accountability. Those are not the issues. The issues are making profit, peddling influence, and getting powerful. Now, once you have these, then suddenly the overall direction of journalism, the overall motive or reason for being a journalist completely changes. And that intention, that way of thinking, as it seeps down the organization, down to the reporter, it just changes the whole thing.
Okay,
If I can add
park
something
that
to that.
thought. We'll just take a break. But after that, because we have now identified something which may be central to the problem here. And I think one of the reasons we're having this debate in terms of if we are thinking about some kind of corrective measures, then we also have to identify the major problem, which is the center of gravity of this. But that we'll do after a short break, and in this break, we are also going to show you the promos for SDTV and some of the packages that we have already done in terms of sustainable development.
It's diverse.
It's original.
It's SDTV.
SDTV के लिए एजाज हैदर आपकी खिदमत में हाजिर। इस वक्त इस्लामाबाद के हेलीपोर्ट पे खड़े हैं और मंजिल है हमारी 11। We'll try and give you an idea of what has happened here. Welcome back to our program on media. Fahd, let me try and recreate the story. There's a certain kind of system, as we determined based on rent seeking and graft and the rest of it. And suddenly if I'm correct, also the cross ownership of the media. So you have the same people come into television channels and own television channels, and this is something that allows you a lot of power. It also allows you to protect your other interests. Within this larger thing, and given the system, the journalists come in, and some of the quote unquote smarter ones decide that they can make use of this, because under the overhang of this, they decide that they can also do their own thing. So they do their own thing also on the sidelines. They also get plugged into what the owners want them to do, and everyone lives happily ever after. Is that
Precisely.
correct?
It is a very cozy arrangement, and not only is it cozy, but it's also commercially very comfortable. So the anchor knows that he can get a fat salary from the channel without having any major responsibility in terms of the overall channel. He can do his own thing. For the owners also, it's a good thing. The anchor or whoever it is, whether it's a senior journalist or a columnist, can not only represent the owner's interest in many ways on the screen, but he can do so off screen also, because of the influence that he or she has. So it's a very unholy nexus, and I don't use that term very lightly. Now the problem here is that this nexus is not particular to Pakistan only,
Correct.
but it's extremely pronounced here. In fact, it is so pronounced that it is driving the media engine.
Not only.
That's where the problem is.
No, but
There's
another
another
problem. Ejaz, let
we
me
have
add
we
one
have
thing to what you're saying.
To be very careful, we have to drive a distinction.
I personally think that we are discussing the role of the anchors. At
The
this
anchors.
point.
I want
We
to
have
make
to be
this
very
clear.
specific about
Well,
it.
actually,
because
no, that's
That's
the
the
that's the
no, because
but there is
because
there's the overall
the kind of issues that we are facing today, or the crisis that we are in, it has arisen primarily because of a few anchors. So they basically belong to that power matrix, and they consider themselves as the vehicles.
Let me add something to that.
Whereas the issues relating to the reporters, they are mostly basically capacity issues, lack of training issues.
No,
they also
hold on,
work.
hold on, hold
They
on.
also work
I
for.
think- I
They
think-
also work for the
We're
lobbies.
discussing
but I think there is
ownership model.
look at it like this. Before the advent of television, outside of the state broadcaster, we had the larger circulation newspapers, Urdu newspapers, and we all know, at least on the grapevine, that there were any number of columnists in the Urdu language press who were plugged in to the system that we are talking about. It was probably the rewards were much less compared to what they are now. It's almost like saying that, look, you've got a problem there and there was a conflict, but because you were using knives, so your ability to kill was much less. Now that you've got machine guns, the same conflict can get you many more corpses than it did.
Absolutely.
But the issue of its being pronounced in Pakistan, Fahd, I mean, if you go back a year and a half, I think, when there was this 2G spectrum scandal in India, and there were a number of, I think there were probably over 100 journalists from print and the electronic side that were implicated in that scandal. And essentially the sort of unholy nexus with the corporate sector, which actually takes me back to that famous book by Chomsky, Manufacturing Consent, or in this case even Manufacturing Dissent, depending on what do you want to do. If there is a structural problem that then also influences the functional side of it, then how do we get out of that? Because someone, now, for instance, now since the proverbial has hit the fan, some people will try to reinvent themselves. But in the long term, it will fall back into the same rut.
Ejaz, they will try to reinvent themselves, and they will say they will bring our code of conduct, we'll do this, we'll hire credible people, precisely because of the fact the civil society and people like you have reached a stage where we are now demanding that there should be a code of conduct. Now it is a demand not coming from the government but from certain sections of the society. So they will try to play by the tune. The initial tune that was played up was freedom of expression, right? From 2002 onward, the theme that has been built up, it was the state and the mercantilist interest or the economic interest of the elite that started empowering itself through the cross-media ownership and through these television channels, especially through cross-media ownership, by becoming an apostle and a prophet and a representative and a symbol of the freedom of expression of the people of Pakistan. The space that exists in journalism and in electronic media, print media, television, this exists under the principle of the public interest and for the people or for a certain kind of intellectual class. That is precisely why even in an imperial order, United States or the very major powers have to respect your freedom of expression because they believe in the principle. It is not that Pakistan's mercantile interest or Pakistani intelligence community can capture these television channels and then let them talk against United States or let them talk against something else. This is what we have found. So Pakistani television channels are free to talk against America, for instance, or United States, but they have serious reservations. You know, you can't talk about the cement, what cement industry is doing, what other commercial interests are doing, what one or the other kind of economic interest in media is doing. Have you ever seen so far in the last 10 years that Pakistani television channels or even print newspapers have dissected, analyzed printed papers or columns, analyzing the kind of control and monopoly that exists in Pakistan's media, both in print and electronic?
But
this is a capture. One term I give you before you go ahead. Fahd had been using the term of nexus, the unholy nexus. He says, I don't want to use this term very uneasily. I said, there's another professional term to look at it. Just like when you look in an elitist state, you have a theory of capture, that the bureaucracy gets captured by the powerful elite, and then the bureaucracy, the deputy commissioner or the taxation authority makes the laws, or police, for instance, and all across South Asia, they implement the will of the ruling elite in the name of the law or the law and order. Similarly, there was a new space and a new industry, that is the media, the electronic media, and the same power elite captured it, they seized it through various kind of mechanisms. Now the challenge is to take it back from them, to bring this space back to the society.
And how will that happen, Quatrina? I mean, is there a sense, can we be optimistic that there will be through gradual steps? Like for instance, Moeed said that now there's a certain kind of pressure coming from the people and therefore they'll have to reinvent. Because the way I look at it, if there is no external pressure or effective external pressure, then the template is working for so many people. Why the hell should they break it?
Nobody is going to change unless the people make a change. And I want to talk about a couple of very crucial things over here, which I think have a large impact on what we're talking about. First of all, anchors, and again, I want to reinforce what Imtiaz said. We are talking about prime time television talk show hosts. They are the people we are talking about, many of whom are represented in this room. And let's talk about it. There's a big elephant in this room which we're not talking about. There is a letter that is circulating. I don't know if it's authentic. I have no reason to believe that it's fake, with the names of 19 television anchors on it about how much money and property they received from a business tycoon. That list is out there and it's going viral, and a lot of people are waking up and saying, oh my God, these are people we've been listening to, being influenced by people in many ways we trusted. Television anchors are in your home every night. So obviously you sort of bond with them and you listen to them. And unless the managements clean up their acts, there is going to be no way that these same journalists can continue going on and on and on, but they will unless social pressure kicks in. It disappoints me that Maya Khan, and I will take the name, she was a person who hounded people in a public park on live television.
It was all state managed, orchestrated thing.
And eventually, she was allowed, she was pushed out of that channel. She was pushed out of that channel by social pressure, by Twitter, by Facebook, by people calling in. I was on a show with Moeed show on that subject. She's been re-employed by another channel. Now, this is something that has to stop, and the only people who are going to make it stop are the viewers. No, but I know, and one thing I want to add, Ejaz, before I go, I'm not going to take names here because I can't prove it, but there is a television talk show host who also writes a column, and I know for a fact that he doesn't write the column himself. The concept of plagiarism in this country seems to be a joke. And we need to bring this up. We as a community, we know these things. I can't prove it, that's why I'm not taking his name.
People are doing their job
just for money.
Yeah.
It's not out of any conviction. So you're writing a column for a religio-political party, then you're writing a column for your newspaper, then you're hosting a show. There's so many people who are doing this under
And they're
different
getting
names.
paid under different names, and they're
And
getting paid
they
for
are
it.
minting money just because, I mean, and I presume the owners would know.
Of course
but
they know.
still they have been allowed to do this.
And it's just one thing I want you said right at the beginning of the program, that is journalism a profession? I would say it's not a profession for me. It's not a career for me. It is a calling. I am still idealistic enough to believe that journalism is a calling. It is not something you do lightly. It is a faith. And these people who are corrupt, anyone who is corrupt, they spoil the faith, the community, the fraternity of journalism. And it's about time that if nobody else is going to do it, we, the journalists, have to stand up and say, you know what, we're not going to associate ourselves with you anymore, because you're destroying not just a calling and a faith, but you're destroying everything that we believe in.
Yeah, but Quatrina, this thing about it being a calling, frankly, has been more of a myth than a reality.
Not for me.
Because I mean, look at this. You know, when you talk about the war correspondents, starting with the Crimean War, and Philip Knightley wrote this brilliant book called The First Casualty. So truth is the first casualty, and you actually reporting, because there's a certain kind of bias that, and we all have this whole thing about being objective is also a myth, because all of us use certain frameworks.
You're not
certain-
ever objective. You're human
but
beings, Ejaz.
correct, but what I'm saying is, when I said that it's, you know, when I raised this question about whether we are professionals, Mencken said that you are a professional when you can generate something on your own, like a lawyer, like a doctor, like an author. When you can be overruled by the business manager simply because a story cannot go in because you're getting ads from a particular corporate organization, then you're not really a professional.
But that's not what happens in mature markets mostly. It's places like Pakistan where this can happen, which is why the whole concept of journalism has been so diluted that if you talk to a common Pakistani viewer whose framework or whose window into this field is the television screen, he will have a very strange view of what journalism is. And that is a failure of people like us who are professional journalists, who have perhaps through their work not been able to inform the viewer, the reader, what this field is for, because it's a new field in Pakistan. If you compare it with, for example, the United States, for example, it's a bad comparison, but it's a mature market. For them, journalism has been part of the fabric of democracy for the past 200, 300 years. So people have grown up with it. You don't need to tell them what journalism is. And the whole concept of journalism being there for public good, for the larger, greater good of society, as being part of something which is there in their blood, they then have a certain social pressure because they expect something from the media. Our people, because of the way that our society has been, because of dictatorships, etc., etc., this is their first exposure to journalism, and what they're seeing is what we are showing them, which is far from what journalism is. So it's a strange mix, and that is why perhaps that required social pressure is not building up, because perhaps the viewer is not realizing the wrong that is being done to the viewer. He's not realizing it.
They don't know
How
that.
can the common viewer,
Understand or
Because this
these things.
program that we're airing
these
today, they would
electronic
not go on
media.
air in any television channel in Pakistan. It's on SDTV, it's on the web.
Yeah.
It's not going to go out on the airwaves.
Yeah, but
Precisely,
still,
but here's-
we
here's-
have to also, I
here's-
think, trace back that
but
the
here's my,
owners here,
here's my
based-
question. Here's my question. I'm doing this program and I've got this really great panel to discuss these issues, because I'm not getting any ads, at least not for now. But if I were to begin to get ads, and if I were begin to essentially get sucked into the entire corporate media scene, then how much of that would actually begin to impact negatively my ability to put across certain things or get my guests to say what they want to say? And that's an important question.
To answer you on this, media regulation was my subject in London School of Economics. and things were pretty advanced as compared to the Pakistani media scene. So I got to study both what's happening in UK and Europe. One thing that consistently came up in the research studies was that in a battle for the accuracy of the content and the expansion of the industry, the governments and the political elite and the industry favors the expansion of the industry. For instance, in one research they have seen that faced with the dominance of the American content and media, the Europeans, which had a far greater emphasis on the balance of the content, accuracy of the content, were willing to compromise on the accuracy of the content for the larger size of the television channels with larger capital markets so that they can employ more technology. Now, what will happen to the web television? Right now, you don't really have the competition from other more technologically sophisticated web television channels. So you can actually air a content that is novel, that is accurate, that is truthful, and so many people would like to watch it on SDTV or on the YouTube. But if other more powerful, this is a new space is being created, always like always is being created by idealistic people. The moment the space becomes a relevant place to influence those 20 million Pakistanis on the internet, powerful economic interests will move in the space. With money, they will improve the web TV. They will improve the structure of the web TV, the color, the design, the graphic and everything. So people will not only come for the content, they'll come from all those things. So the content will lose out and the technology will win. Now to make the technology work under a certain kind of framework so that the content, you see, you always have to have a regulatory framework to preserve the content. That is what the whole battle is. Because Europe is at least 50 years ahead of, or 60 years ahead of Pakistan in terms of understanding these issues. And we need to learn from the experiences of United Kingdom and of the other European countries, because they are precisely fighting against the vulgarity of the content that comes from the United States, which has a much less regulatory understanding of the content. We're very powerful economic interests. Because see, the American capitalism has always been a free market economy, laissez-faire, sort of thing. The Europe, on the other hand, had been social democracies, where they have tried to preserve, the essence of the democracy, the freedom. That is why you have all these, the protectionist state. So they always had a problem in preserving and safeguarding their content against the American content, right? So we need to learn from that.
That's a very important point, and it actually links up with what Fahd was saying. Because Fahd, my question really is: do you think today's U.S. media is in the same mold as the muckrakers of the 1920s?
In some ways yes, in some ways no. And I think a very interesting thing has happened, and it has happened in the last 15-20 years, especially in the 90s. A strange thing happened. Corporations, big, huge corporations, began to buy out media houses in the US, which was a new thing. You had, organizations like the New York Times, which were family owned, so they were pure. But in the 90s, when the economy boomed during the Clinton years, Warner Brothers, Viacom, Disney, they all came in, they bought up CBS, NBC. So these media organizations became small parts of a massive organization.
Brilliant analysis.
And then what happened was that when the head of news was now reporting to the overall CEO of Disney,
Yes.
and the Disney guy was this big CEO who said, don't tell me about journalism, tell me about the bottom line, my profit. So the American media went through a severe crisis. And as a result, now here's the difference. The journalist community, they reacted because they realized that their profession, which was noble, which had a 250-year-long history, was suddenly being hijacked by the mercantile forces, which he said, the captains of American industry. So there was a crisis. But how they reacted was, they said, we have to save this profession. What do we do? There's an excellent report which was compiled, in which some very big media names got together. They interviewed about 1,000 journalists across the US and said, let's go back to the basics. And they asked a basic question: what is journalism for? He said, we need to go back to the soul of this profession to save it from the Disneys and the Viacoms and the Warner Brothers. So now American journalist is fighting back. Here we do not have that capacity. We are being drowned because that capacity to fight back and say, let's save this profession, is not there, because probably very few of us actually know what the soul of this profession is.
I just want to add one point to Fahad's analysis, brilliant analysis. that these large industrial conglomerates of United States like Disney or Warner Brothers also then had to have a political role. I mean, they have learned it, that they influence the politics and to control their economic interest, to safeguard their economic interest. So on one hand, they're invested in the media. On the other hand, they're invested into the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So the whole system then becomes the same nexus.
So essentially what we are saying is that
capture.
Yes, the pattern that we see emerging in Pakistan and which is becoming pronounced,
so it has already
is also something that has happened elsewhere.
Yes,
and therefore we need to begin to look at how we can develop that capacity that Fahd is talking about in terms of, for instance, the US, where the journalists decided that they're not going to allow this to happen without resistance. So the way I look at it, from what you are saying, all of you, and I think this has been an amazing analysis of various aspects of journalism, that in terms of resisting this, we do need capacity, which we don't have currently. We also probably need to have an understanding of what is happening, which I don't think that there is much understanding of it either. Or even if there is much understanding of it in certain quarters, there are greater interests
to override that,
to stay within the template, to remain a part of an enterprise which seems to be giving dividends to everyone at various levels, big or small. So we don't want the government to come in. We don't have the capacity, and there's no intention as far as the owners are concerned to actually sit down and work out a code of ethics. I don't think that the working journalists have the capacity to put together an organization that can actually make things work. So where do we go from here?
Where do we go?
It's, I think, a state of helplessness given
Pakistan so many crises. As I said earlier, there's no intention within the governmental structures at least to invest in human resource. There's no readiness even within these big media houses to invest in their human resource.
No, but so why would they invest in you? Because they want a person who is pliable, and you are unlikely to be that.
I mean, we have to go a long way. The example that Fahad gave, the example of United States or Europe, I think we are way off from that, and for that I think we need to develop our political space as well. We are not there right now, the wear and tear that this society is going through. I don't think we can really aim for that. Probably a time will come when we, people like us or well-meaning people, professional journalists, are able to put together something and to convey to the people that, look, I mean, this is where you have to draw your line. Right now there's so much enmeshing of political intelligence as well as business interests and also criminal interests that I think they override even our small noble intentions of setting things right.
Yeah,
let me ask another thing before
I have a road ahead.
Yeah.
I think I see a road ahead.
Okay, here's a very strong fortress and you have to attack it. The obvious strategy would be to try and look at the weakest part of it. And since the template is working for most media houses, there is no reason for them to break it. Now, as far as television channel is concerned, we have the problem of television ratings, and there is a structural problem there. Now, we cannot get the channels to change things unless this kind of system begins to hurt their revenues. You know what I'm saying? Is it possible then to attack it in a way to take the strategy of indirect approach and put pressure for a change in the rating system, which then forces the channels to begin to create a different bouquet of programming and to raise the level of discourse?
I understand your question. It's a very broad-based question and a complex question, and you have raised a series of questions. See, look, there is a conflict of interest going on. The business tycoon or the Seth that is there in the media for his political interest or to preserve his economic interest or to further his economic interest, it is basically for the power grab. will not like to do things which I and you or Imtiaz want them to do, right? It's a conflict of interest situation. What we can do is to lobby the politics and the people. At one hand, we have to create the awareness among the educated. Ultimately, this is not going to come from villages. This is going to come from the urban areas, from the cities of Islamabad, Rawalpindi, Karachi, Lahore, Faisalabad, Multan, where we have these educated Pakistanis, which might be a minority, but they are the opinion shapers. Once we get them on board saying this model is not working, and this discussion we are having today in SDTV is precisely because of the fact that the model is not working. You know, the stink of the model, the failure of the model has become obvious. With this Riaz Malik staged interview, it has become obvious. We have to lobby the parliament, we have to lobby the donors, we have to lobby the international community, we have to lobby the people, the intelligentsia, the think tanks in this country. Look guys, we need an alternating.
Can we also lobby the corporate sector?
We can lobby the corporate sector. You see, the major.
They now have, all of them have this,
definitely.
what is it that they call the corporate social responsibility kind of.
Let me ask a question.
Excellent. Just
A lot of
just
people
give me
don't
one
know
second.
this. Okay.
This is the Achilles heel. Because you know, when you look towards Coke or you look towards Mobilink or you look towards Telenor, these people will understand you more than anybody else will understand you. They will be the first people to understand the sensitivity of it, right? They have corporate responsibility, they have to show their accounts, they have to speak in front of the whole world. Amazing idea. I mean, they
So
are
let's get and do something which actually hurts them, and I'm going to come back to Fahd and Quatrina after this
We
break.
all keep talking
After this break.
after the break. Okay.
Yeah, because we also want our viewers to know a little more about SDTV.
It's diverse.
It's original.
It's SDTV.
मैं बड़ा हो जाऊंगा तो मैं फौजी बनूंगा।
टीचर बनना चाहती हूँ।
कोई डॉक्टर बनूंगा।
डॉक्टर बनूंगी। पाकिस्तानी बनूंगी। डॉक्टर बनना चाहती हूँ।
Welcome back to our program on media. Quatrina, you wanted to say something before we
I did.
took the
You
break.
talked about the fortress and how to attack the fortress, and I think any military strategist will tell you that the quickest way to make a fortress fall is from the inside. And journalists are on the inside. They're inside that fortress. There are enough journalists who can see what is going wrong. But sadly, there's a huge problem here, and that is the fact that the disparity between and the divide between the print journalists and the television journalists are what weaken the fabric of unity and community amongst journalists. And when you talk about the journalist unions, the Pakistan Federal Union of Journalists or so many other organizations, they are all predominantly comprised of print media journalists who in many ways resent the inflated salaries and inflated egos of television anchors. And I think that is a huge problem. And I think that one of the advantages that owners have, they own newspapers and they own TV channels, and they pay the anchors huge amounts of money, higher than what they pay the editors of their own newspapers. And I think that's a huge problem here. And the other thing that needs to be reintroduced and reintroduced fast in many channels, which is completely missing, is some kind of a buffer between the owners and the journalists, which in the newspapers is the office of the editor. And in many newspapers it works really well, in some it doesn't. But I think we need to reintroduce that concept into television journalists as well. And my last comment on this, on the journal, because I'm just making quick points here, very, very crucially, television talk show hosts, which is the ones who are really the problem, and they are a problem because they are also the celebrities in this country. We don't have movie stars, we don't have anybody else. So cricketers and TV anchors seem to be the celebrities in this country. And that again creates this divide between the journalist community. The only way this is going to work is for television anchors who believe in the calling, as I call it. And I include in that list people like Fahd, Moeed. Imtiaz doesn't do his own show right now, but hopefully he will soon, because he's one of the kind of people we need. People like Fahd Husain. A lot of my friends are not involved in the corruption, and they're the ones who need to get together and fight this illegal criminal activity of journalists who take bribes and to influence public opinion on the basis of money.
I noticed that despite my 20 years of journalism, you did not take my name.
I'm sorry, you're the host of this program, so I should have. Yes,
I was just being jocular. But Fahd, some of the things that we've come up with, that there is a problem, that there is a template that is working fine for people, that we lack capacity in terms of mounting resistance to this. But the optimistic side is that if we can identify the weak spots in this, then we can begin to formulate a strategy to address this. And one of the things that I talked about, and which Moeed agreed with, was to lobby the corporate sector in terms of the advertisers, for instance, Mobilink or this, that, and the other, you name it, and say, okay, this is what the people think, and you can actually have the citizens petition them and say, well, this is a certain kind of program that we don't want to see, because these are the people based on the TRPs that give the revenue to the channels. You think that can work? I mean, you have run two channels.
Ejaz, I have a different take on it. I think it's human nature. You can't go against human nature. People want to see things which they enjoy. That's the bottom line. You can't instill a sense of responsibility in a viewer, because it's his very private thing. What you can do is level the playing field, and I think that's where the regulator comes in. I think we are talking a lot about ratings. You can't get rid of ratings because it is essentially a part of the commercial scene where the advertiser has to decide where to give the money. So
we are not saying that we get rid of ratings. I mean, there's got to be a system, but
there's
the manner in which the system is working right now, there's a problem with that.
The problem, yes, you can make it much more representative, etc., etc., but there is a deeper problem inherent within this, and that is the problem of content. Here's what I mean. For example, let me go back to the US example. They have Nielsen company which does their ratings, AC Nielsen. So they have a stiff competition. But when, for example, NBC and CBS or Fox and CNN and MSNBC are competing for ratings, they're essentially competing on the same wicket, on journalism, on the content of journalism. So if, for example, CNN is losing out, they'll say, how can we produce better journalism? They will not say, let me reenact a rape scene. Because that's not part, that content is not part of what CNN is, and that is the way it is. Now here, that is where I come into the role of the regulator. There has to be a regulation of what you're showing on news channels. For example, if I'm doing journalism on a news channel, how can I possibly compete with a reenactment of a rape scene? The viewer will watch that. That's human nature. They'll always watch that. So they're forcing me to compete as a journalist against something which is essentially not journalism. Here's where the regulator needs
a film.
It's a film.
Reality TV.
So a regulator needs to come in and they need to tell me, okay, on this channel you do journalism, and on every other channel which has a license to do journalism, they will do journalism. Now compete for ratings on the quality of better journalism. Don't compete by going down and race towards the gutter.
Absolutely.
Here's the problem.
Brilliant point. Brilliant
to
point.
reinforce this point,
Like about 20 years ago, I asked a British journalist who was working with the BBC whether the American media is influencing the British media and the European media. And then we were talking about a few female anchors appearing on NBC, CNN with low cleavages, low necks. And I said, is it possible? He said, entirely not possible on the BBC, on the British media. But now you see more or less the same thing. Off and on you see the low necks. This is what explains the influence of this big empire that is called the information machinery of the United States of America, and then also the race for ratings. They think this is something attractive, at least for the male viewers. So they have to have ingredients that attract more and more viewership. Here you can go against the human nature.
But Fahd raises an important point that has
I have
sort
something
of
to add to the
sort of pulled me back from my optimism back to pessimism. But he's got a very important point. But here's my question.
Let me add something to Fahad's point. You see, Fahd started by saying something which looked as moving in one direction. It's a very complex argument because obviously the content cannot be controlled. Neither the viewer's taste can be improved or controlled very quickly. But what happens is, look from 2 points of view. Boxing is about fighting. It's a very rowdy thing. American boxing is a very rowdy thing. But there are rules that you cannot hit at certain areas and you cannot kill someone, right? For instance, you cannot bring a knife inside the boxing. You cannot bring a knuckle inside the boxing. You cannot bring a gun and shoot the other person. I mean, these are you going way beyond it, right? Similarly, look at the private hospital and health industry. I mean, you make money, you charge a huge amount for doing appendectomies or cesarean sections, but you're not supposed to do a cesarean section where a cesarean section is not due. You're not supposed to do a cholecystectomy or an appendectomy when appendectomy is not due. If you're actually doing it, there is a regulatory framework and you're guilty of violating that regulatory framework.
So when even though you make money,
the just surgeons
even you make
in
money.
Pakistan,
So the
surgeons
point
are
is
doing
this,
this,
that
by the way.
No, I agree. There's all kind of violation crime. But the point is that if there is a code where Fahd comes in the second part of his document, if there is a code that puts restrictions and limitations and stops from doing certain things, which doesn't exist at the moment, then the content will be produced within the limitations, just like the hospital and the boxing thing that you can't.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. But
So
here's my question.
Fears, Moeed, there are
No, but
inherent
here's my
fears
question.
in government regulation.
No, government. I'm not saying government regulation.
Who's going to
court
provide
doesn't have
that?
to be government.
Who's going to provide that regulatory framework?
Exactly.
And how effectively, if at all, can that be enforced? And just to specifically, identify a case, this particular planted interview or allegedly planted interview.
Call it a staged interview.
Oh, staged
Staged is the
staged
right
interview.
interview.
Or,
Staged
okay,
interview.
choreographed or
Choreographed.
orchestrated,
Choreographed and
choreographed.
staged interview.
Okay. Now, supposing there was a regulatory mechanism, what would happen to the two anchors as well as the channel which aired it?
You see, they can be banned. The anchors can be banned for, say, 2 years or 3 years. They can be fined and penalized. The whole judgment will explain what they have done wrong. Because even now, when there is not a defined code or not a very well trusted code, what they have violated is their job is to question, critically evaluate everybody. If you are a newsmaker, my job is to critically evaluate whatever you're saying, but not to facilitate your point of view. This is not my job. If I am only doing a stage interview with you, I am facilitating your point of view at a time and through a mechanism which is going to influence the national politics, the national legal discourse, the civil the interest of the society.
Well,
so
we have punishments for match fixing, don't we?
We have punishments for. Haven't you seen Pakistani cricketers? What is that? I mean, that is much less a sabi or a better cause, a sanguine cause or a sacrosanct cause than media. Media is far more important than cricket.
Yeah,
but cricketers can be jailed, right, for doing what they do.
Let's not talk in a vacuum. It's a country where the rule of law, respect for law is minimal. And where medias are, big media houses evade taxes, they indulge in all sorts
But that's a
of
different
corruption.
debate, Imtiaz.
And they are, no, it's not a different debate. The accountability comes only
extension
with
of
the
that
rule
debate.
of law.
And respect for rule of law. But if the highest, the kleptocrats, whether they are politicians or whether they're journals or other people, media tycoons, the person we're talking about, if they are injecting money to circumvent law, then where does the accountability come from?
So what we're left with just a minute, but yes.
That's a practical limitation, but let me just propose something which Dr. Moeed and I have proposed in a paper, which is that you said who will regulate it. I think the present regulatory authority has completely failed. There's this difference.
No trust.
So a couple of things which we've proposed. Number one, we need to raise a new regulatory authority or completely reform PEMRA. That regulatory authority should be formed through an act of parliament. Its chairman should be a constitutional post like the Chief Election Commissioner. So there is complete job security. All its members need to be pulled in from the private sector who've had experience of regulation, best practices across the world. And then somebody like Dr. Moeed Pirzada can head that organization. Only then can such an organization bring in the kind of reforms that we are looking for, and there are precedents across the world where such organizations with professional strength and acumen have been able to regulate media without curtailing the freedom of expression.
Absolutely.
That's critical.
That's critical.
Well, thank you. I mean, this has been a great debate, but I'm really grateful to Imtiaz, Moeed, Fahd and Quatrina for being part of this debate. The issues are fairly complex. We have seen that there are structural problems that also then impact the functioning of the media. Media does not really operate in a vacuum, and it is very much a part of the power structures that have evolved and developed in Pakistan, and therefore whenever we want to look at the functioning of the media, we will have to necessarily look at them in relation to the rest of the power structures. However, because as Quatrina said, that this is more than just a profession, it's a calling, howsoever idealistic that may be, one can't really fault that view, and therefore when we are looking at the functioning in relation to the power structures, we also have to see how much the media can do to remain independent of those power structures. And some of the suggestions that have come up during this program actually point to the measures that can be taken internally and externally to try and make that happen. You watch this program, if you want to give us any feedback, you will see the institutional Twitter handle of SDPI at SDPI Pakistan on your screen, as well as my personal Twitter handle, which is at Ejaz Haider. You'll also see our Facebook page. We would like you to give us your feedback and your comment, and we hope to bring you many more programs in the future. Thank you.